Hi guys, my name is Jan-Hendrik Peters. I'm a Premier Field Engineer working for Microsoft Germany. When I'm not working, I'm a contributor to the lab automation framework Automated Lab on GitHub, as you can see here. I have also put a link in the description. In this first video, we will go over the Automated Lab module and its requirements and create our own first basic lab. In the upcoming videos that we will release, we'll show you what you can do with all the helpful commandlets provided by Automated Lab, not only regarding labs, but also regarding your own infrastructure basically. How to implement the release pipeline in Automated Lab, which we'll also demo at PSConf EU 2018. What Automated Lab can do for you Linux admins out there. How to create a hybrid lab to test failover scenarios to the cloud. And how to add your own custom roles to Automated Lab, and much, much more. So without further ado, let's get started. We will start on a plain Windows 10 machine. No frills. So we have the Hyper-V extensions exposed and activated Hyper-V as a feature. And of course, we installed Visual Studio Code. So this machine will be our lab host. Apart from that, nothing else has been configured. I'm already on the GitHub page where we actually host our code. So this would be your first stop when you want to download Automated Lab. As you can see, we have a little description here to get you started. And of course, our releases are present on the PowerShell gallery, which with new releases coming every now and then. This is where our code lives. You will also find our wiki here. So in case you need any information on, for example, getting started, you can just browse here and have a look at what is actually needed to get your lab up and running. But we will get to that in a couple of seconds. So, first of all, as you can see, Hyper-V is activated, and we activated the Hyper-V PowerShell as well. So this is, well, one of the basic needs that we have for a lab. You have to use, for example, VMware, or you can use Azure. Either of those three is fine. First of all, we need to install module Automated Lab. This will pull down all the bits needed to actually get started. And after this is finished, the first thing we have to do, if it comes from the PS gallery and not from our installer, create the lab sources folder. This is the folder on one of your local drives, which actually contains sample scripts, ISO files, and so on. This can be achieved by calling the commandlet new lab sources folder. So let's hit that. This is the little piece of information that you will get with Automated Lab version 5 and onwards. This is a one-time information. So we will collect telemetry data, which is your country, so your course geolocation, the number of lab machines you use, the roles you have used, the time it took your lab to finish, and if you remove your lab later on, how long your lab ran. Since we don't want to opt out, we just select the default. And this question is only asked once. You can control later if you want to enable or disable telemetry by calling the lab commandlets enable and disable lab telemetry as seen here. In the background, new lab sources folder will download all the stuff from GitHub and extract it to your C drive. So let's wait for that to happen. All right, and we're back. So in the meantime, our lab sources folder has been created, and you can see this is the general structure of it. In the custom roles folder, you can put your custom role scripts. We will get to that in a later video. In the ISOs folder, this is actually very important, you will put your ISO files. These are the files that are actually needed to create the differencing disks that Automated Lab uses later on. There are also a couple of sample scripts already included. For example, the one we will be using later on, the single Windows 10 client. There are also a couple of tools available that are used, for example, on each machine. So the tools folder gets copied to the root directory of each of your machines, whether they are on Azure, Hyper-V, or VMware. You can also include certain software packages to install on the VMs and define so-called post-installation activities, which we will get to in a later video. For example, you would be able to create 6,000 AD users and the appropriate amount of organizational units just by calling one of those post-installation activities. All right, so let's just copy a couple of ISO files here. Once the ISO file is there, we can get started. This is just a basic Windows Server 2016 ISO file. You know where to get those, so just download them from, for example, your Visual Studio subscription, and you're fine. During the course of your labs, you might want to add some other ISOs as well, for example, SQL Server, Team Foundation Server, Exchange, and so on. This all depends on the roles you're going to use, which we will see in the later labs. So let's get started on the lab deployment itself. And every lab with Automated Lab starts with a new lab definition. This is the first basic step that you'll need to take to create your actual lab definition. Let's just call it my first lab. And let's select the default virtualization engine as Hyper-V. Yeah. This is all that you will basically need at the beginning to get started. Now, your lab definition is fine by itself, but of course, we would like to add some machines as well. To add machines, you can simply use the commandlet add lab machine definition. But first of all, we would like to see which operating systems we actually have available in our lab. So in order to do this, we can use get lab available operating system. Let's just execute that real quick and have a look at what we have available. So these are basically all the images that were found in our ISO file. And you can also see that the product key is automatically selected for you, that the image name that you can use on Azure is selected properly, and so on and so on. So let's create our first lab machine definition, which is also incidentally our only machine, by calling the command add lab machine definition. Just give it a name. For example, my first VM, and select an operating system. This is actually all we need. There are a couple of operating systems available. Let's just choose the data center desktop experience and be done with it. This is actually already enough to define your first VM. There are a couple of more options available, which we'll explore later on. For example, you would be able to set the memory that your system might want to use. You can add some roles to it. For example, if your first virtual machine should be a domain controller, then just promote it to one. It's just like the flick of a switch. You would just say the role should be domain controller, and you're basically done. Now let's add this machine to our definitions. And you can see here in the meantime that Automated Lab automatically creates virtual networks for you. In case you've wondered which IP address your machine will get, this is done automatically as well. The last step we need, and this is actually where the magic happens, is install lab. So just call the command install lab, and everything will happen for you. So there are a couple of settings that we are setting. For example, we will set trusted hosts to a wildcard, which is probably not the best choice. And you can see here, the lab deployment has started on our machine. We get a little toast notification for that. And you will get another notification once it's done. This might actually take some time because we will create the base image first. These base images will get stored in the folder Automated Lab VMs and will be used subsequently so that your lab VMs will deploy even faster. So let's wait for that to happen. The process of creating the base image actually takes some time, but this only happens once. So once your first base image of this particular edition of Windows Server 2016, for example, is done, all subsequent lab deployments will be quite fast. So what happens now is that the VMs actually started, and once it is done and we can actually connect to the VM via WinRM, we assume that the lab is finished. This shouldn't take too long. And it's done. So while we are waiting for the machines to start up, I'm going to show you the last command that you might or might not need, which is called show lab deployment summary. This is actually, well, the interesting bit after your lab has finished, because you get to see which parts of the lab were deployed, which roles you have deployed, for example, and how to connect to the machines. So let's have a look at the deployment summary. And that looks good. So the first lab setup took 22 minutes. Every subsequent lab setup that just creates a very simple machine should take around 1 to a maximum of 2 minutes, depending on your disks. We recommend using fast SSD drives for storing your lab data, but that's totally up to you. So now we can connect to the lab machines, for example, by using a remote desktop connection and the commandlet connect LabVM. Because, of course, we don't know the credentials, for example, that were used to actually create the VM. This is handled by Automated Lab internally, and we can simply connect to the VM and everything is handled for us. So we actually get a remote desktop connection with the credentials pre-filled. And can simply connect to the machine. Since it's a GUI server, we will be able to click around all we want. And you can see the logon worked flawlessly. The same thing can be achieved, for example, through PowerShell remoting. So we have a couple of commandlets for that as well. But for the time being, this should be enough to get you started with your first lab. Thank you for your patience, and we hope you try it soon. So install module Automated Lab is all it takes to get actually started. Thank you very much.